Hello, I'm Ollie Welsh from Eurogamer, and welcome to the Developer Sessions at Rezzed 2017. Coming up later, we've got Steel Division Normandy 44. After that, at 3 p.m., Sunless Skies, and at 4 o'clock, a very exciting announcement from Creative Assembly about the future of Total War Warhammer. Hi to everybody watching on Twitch, by the way. Right now, we're going to have a panel discussion about the future of gaming technology, and joining me, we've got the preeminent journalists about video game technology. I would say that because we publish their work on Eurogamer, the guys from Digital Foundry. So to my right, we've got the veteran games journalist and the founder of Digital Foundry, Rich Ledbetter, and then it's John Linneman and Tom Morgan.
All right.
So let's start with the hot topic in gaming tech right now that's being pushed, I guess, mostly by display manufacturers, and that's 4K.
Yeah. Yeah, where should we begin? Well, I guess essentially it's the next step forward for gaming technology. I guess in a way it's almost being foisted on us in the sense that by this time next year, I think it's going to be quite difficult for you to find a 1080p screen to buy. Which is kind of a fait accompli. And obviously, both of the console manufacturers have already moved on to 4K boxes. We've got the PlayStation 4 Pro now, and we have Project Scorpio sometime later this year. So yeah, it's a fascinating challenge, essentially, because if you think of 4K as 4 1080p screens stuck together, in a sense, one big screen, 8 million pixels, the issue there is that it's such a quantum leap, such a big leap over 1080p that, well, in a sense, graphics technology hasn't really caught up with it. So, you know, it's kind of like been evolving over the years. You get your 30% boost year on year in terms of PC GPUs. But suddenly we're propelled to 4 times 1080p.
So up to now, mostly display technology and graphics technology has kept pace with each other. Right?
In the PC space, I'd say so, yeah. And obviously, when PS4 and Xbox One came along, 1080p was firmly established. And for what game developers wanted to do at that point, those GPUs were a pretty good match. I mean, as we've seen, you look at something like Horizon Zero Dawn 1080p, it's phenomenal. But, at the same time, PS4 Pro comes out. I think that's probably the most convincing console 4K game I've seen yet.
Oh yeah, definitely. It doesn't look exactly like a native 4K presentation, but it does have the same pixel count.
Yeah.
And it's pretty convincing, I think, especially when coupled with HDR, but which I think kind of highlights the fact that with the insane pixel count on a display like that, you actually don't need to get the pixel perfect one-to-one pixel kind of mapping to get a very convincing image, right?
Yeah.
Because when you think about where you sit when you're watching a TV, it's typically at least a few feet away at minimum, right? So I found like it's difficult to resolve the individual pixels, and so you kind of the reason that we didn't like stuff like 900p or lower resolutions was because the pixels were visible enough that you could see the upscale blur, right? So I think with a game like that and those kinds of techniques, it's very convincing.
Yeah, they're essentially treating 4K as a canvas rather than a hard and fast pixel count. But obviously, what's going to be interesting is Microsoft, their marketing is geared towards native 4K, true 4K as they call it. So once that comes along, it's going to be an interesting battle, I think. But I think fundamentally, you see something like Horizon Zero Dawn, which originally was planned to kind of come out in the same time period as the Pro launch.
Yep.
And we kind of needed that title, I think, because I think it was, my wife and I were watching it. It was just phenomenal when we actually booted it up. Absolutely amazing. But there's going to be a fascinating battle to come. But, John and I are actually at Guerrilla Games last week.
That's right, yep.
And they were talking about how they could have had a sharper presentation on Horizon, but it wouldn't have been native 4K, which is kind of doesn't seem to make sense at that point.
Yeah, I mean, they also kind of discussed that with the checkerboard stuff. There's not just one way to do it, right? Mm-hmm. And a lot of developers are still experimenting with what works and what doesn't. Mm-hmm. It's kind of still a new kind of area for rendering, I think.
And it's not just about pure resolution, right? Because you've got the HDR technology as well.
Yeah, HDR is kind of a bit strange at the moment, I think, because every 4K screen moots for HDR support. And it's actually quite interesting that we have a Panasonic in the office, kind of mid-range Panasonic.
Yeah.
John has the LG OLED screen, which is awesome. So awesome, I had to get one.
Yeah.
But the issue is that he came to our office and it was like, this isn't HDR. This isn't HDR as I understand it.
Yeah.
So yeah, the problem is that 4K in terms of resolution counts is pretty much established now. There are some great screens. We actually bought a 40-inch screen, which you use now as a desktop monitor.
Yeah,
That's
selfishly, I
pretty
just purloined it and put it in front of my desk. But the Panasonics still are kind of the one we use, kind of behind our DF videos when we're all together.
I mean, typically the best sort of mid-range HDR screen, Samsung KS 7000, 8000.
Yeah, that's pretty
easily.
good.
So with HDR, you've got confusing lots of different standards out there with the displays.
All I can really say is, and this is kind of, we're going to be doing a piece on this shortly, but if you really want the top-tier HDR experience, the LG OLEDs, the current 6 series, I think it is, they're kind of being replaced by the 7 series. The 7 series, hugely more expensive, but not hugely better quality-wise from what we understand.
What are we talking, like $3,000? Is that kind of the projected price?
Yeah, that's the projected price for which is almost double what you can get the 6 series for now.
But you can still do great HDR on an LCD, of course, with a nice local dimming solution like what you get on Sony's ZD9, for instance. That looks
Is
really good.
HDR a big tech challenge for the developers and for the manufacturers as well?
Yes and no for the developer, because all games have been HDR for a long time now, and they kind of tone map down. They kind of translate the HDR into SDR for our conventional screens. So in a sense, you might think, well, we can just bypass the tone mapping stage and go straight to HDR. But when we were talking to the Gorilla guys, that wasn't quite so simple.
But as they also said, I mean, the real problem is that different manufacturers implement HDR differently, not just the different screen technologies, and the fact that there's basically 3 standards now.
Yeah.
But the way it's implemented varies so heavily. Like they would test the game on one display, and it's like, well, all right, it doesn't look great here, so let's try to modify it. But then they go and play it on another display, and it looks completely differently. So we're just at that early stage where even though there's standards in play, it doesn't really necessarily pan out across the board.
Yeah, I think it's worth pointing out that 4K screen, you can get a really good one at a good price if you're not so interested in HDR.
Right.
But for the full fat, proper HDR.
There's only one solution, really, isn't there?
We prefer the LG OLEDs for sure, but the Samsungs are still pretty good.
Samsung does a good job.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the realities of 4K gaming right now. How well does PS4 Pro deliver what you would think of as a true 4K experience?
Well, it's not exact. Well, when it came out, we were thinking it's too soon for 4K, even with the doubling of the GPU power, which was on the Pro. In the end, we projected it would get to 1440p. It'd be a 1440p machine, maybe 1800p, and that's pretty much what we got.
Kind of is.
And the question there is how well it upscales, how much can the developers do to it with temporal reprojection, checkerboarding, all these tricks. And across the board, we saw so many games, Call of Duty, Battlefield 1, throwing this at the games, and it turned out to be effective use of the power that's on tap. But it's not the real deal, but it's close enough.
I think the bottom line is you get a tangible improvement over your 1080p experience, and sometimes like Horizon Zero Dawn and a few other titles, Ratchet & Clank is pretty awesome.
Yeah.
You get something which is akin to a native 4K image or very close to it, and you really do see a huge improvement over the standard Full HD. But here's the thing, Uncharted 4, many other games have come out at 1440p. I went to the PlayStation meeting for the announcement. If Mark Cerny had been there on his lectern saying, hey, we're going to have a big bunch of 1440p games, I don't think the audience would have been particularly informed by that. So in a sense, I think there's a long way to go before developers fully get to grips with the Pro. And in the meantime, the price of proper 4K will be dropping on PC, but it is very, very high at the moment. I mean, 1080 Ti has just come out, which will do the job, 4K 60 hertz on most games, but it's like 600.
So what do we expect from Xbox Scorpio then?
Thanks for asking me that. Well, just by the numbers, it will be better than the Pro. There's no way around it. The question is, to what extent Microsoft feel kind of aggrieved by Xbox One and how it didn't perform next to the PlayStation 4, and to the extent to which they have something to prove. Okay, so they've only given us 3 numbers at the moment, which is 8 CPU cores, 6 teraflops, and 320 gigabytes per second bandwidth. There's a couple of things that have leaked. We can kind of fully assume that it will have 12 gigs of RAM, which essentially means the 4K texture packs you get on PC, you will get on Scorpio. That is pretty much a given, I think, at this point. And I mean, it will be more expensive. There's no doubt about it. I mean, a while back, I spoke to one of the GPU manufacturers who were running with 8 gigs on their graphics card. The previous one was 4 gigs. That cost them extra $30, which is not insignificant in terms of a console price. Pro is like, what, £350? So there's going to be a lot of incremental things. If it's a 6 teraflop GPU, that means the chip will be bigger, which means the cost of making the chip will be higher. If they've got a UHD Blu-ray drive, that is more expensive than a standard Blu-ray drive. It will be a bit more expensive. So you can see there's, it will be a premium solution, I'm pretty sure of it. I think they've pretty much said that.
And it will give them bragging rights, but in terms of like somebody, if you put a Pro and a Scorpio running the same third-party title next to each other on the same display, will people be able to tell the difference? Will they be able to say, I can see that's the more expensive, better machine?
See, that's the thing, though, is I think if you already do that with Xbox One and PlayStation 4, the more casual or standard gamers probably wouldn't really see a difference. They'd be like, oh, they both look really good. So I think that's what Microsoft really is, going after a more discerning kind of game player. And I mean, also the Xbox platform was kind of always been the lead in terms of pushing technology in the console space, right? Until the Xbox One. Yep. So I feel like this is like their chance to sort of reach for the throne once again.
Yeah, I think it's really exciting because the bottom line is that when Sony released the Pro, they were the number one, okay? And Microsoft, didn't do so well this generation as they expected to do. And it is, the same guys fundamentally who made the 360, who did the original Xbox, who are used to being technologically state-of-the-art in the lead. And for them not to be there, I think they're going to be working really hard on Scorpio to actually make something immense there. Now, if it meets the native 4K stuff that they've been, target that they've been sort of setting out, great. I'm actually going to be interested to see how the multi-platform ones work out.
Yeah, that makes me think that, we're probably going to see a similar situation, but reversed, where we had like Xbox and PS4, typically Xbox would have a slight resolution disadvantage.
I think the one thing to bear in mind is that we will still be getting the same games on both platforms. I don't think there's, first-party exclusives apart, they're not game changers. And this is really interesting because we are moving away from the traditional console model of...
This was going to be my next question. Is both of these machines are quite a departure from what we've had before. They're promising they're going to be fully compatible with the basic versions of Xbox One and PS4, so they're not new generations.
Yeah.
But major technological refreshes are much more powerful. What's the tech case, do you think, within these companies? What are the tech guys, what case are the tech guys making to say we need these consoles?
Well, in the here and now, it's very simple. The volume of 4K screens that are being manufactured far outstrips 1080p. I think this year it will be 60%, the projection is 60% of screens sold will be 4K. Next year it will be 80%. So there's a strong case for actually having 2 consoles at the moment, one for the 1080p screen user, one for the 4K screen user, and that kind of works out, I think. But going forward, there's a reason we are getting these consoles, and it isn't to do with 4K screens. It's fundamentally Moore's law is slowing down the amount of transistors that you can cram onto a piece of silicon. It used to be the case, doubling every 18 months. That is kind of slowing down. And the old chip manufacturing technology, 28 nanometers, which was PS4 and Xbox One, that actually began in 2011, and it's only this year that we've actually started to see GPUs not on 28 nanometers. So physically, typically, the more transistors you can fit on a given size of silicon, the more powerful it is. So if that is slowing down, then essentially it means that the traditional console-sized generational leap we see in every 4 or 5 years, we're not going to be getting that anymore, which is why 3 years down the road, we have the next step from 28 nanometer, 16 nanometer, and hey, look what's happening. We've got 2 new consoles. So, this is, I think that we will be seeing more incremental steps and probably in line with when we move from one fabrication technology to the next. And I think the next one is either 10 or 7.
So the development is slowing down, but
Yeah.
they want to keep selling boxes.
Yeah, and the way to do it is to adopt a PC model. A lot of people are kind of concerned about the smartphone model, which is you get a new one every year. I don't think that's going to happen because fundamentally I don't think they can make a console box every year that is sufficiently more powerful than the last one. But when you do have a shrink, when you can make your transistors smaller, fit more of them on the same size of silicon, then you do get a nice boost to technology. I think the other thing to bear in mind is that all of this stuff about checkerboarding and stuff like that, we're seeing great results not from sheer brute force GPU power. It's kind of like being a bit more smart in how it's used, but I'm not sure how they can push that on, really.
How are the PC manufacturers going to respond to the fact that consoles are now becoming so much more like PCs and those markets are converging?
Well, I think they love it because it validates their model, essentially. It's great for them. But I think the big issue that the PC manufacturers have is that we still haven't got a PC that kind of fits comfortably in the living room, do we? There's been a number of small form factor boxes that have some really nice technology crammed in. But fundamentally, you still kind of need a keyboard and mouse to use it, and it doesn't have an intuitive front end. The whole sort of integration thing isn't really there. Microsoft, in particular, are doing their best to make Scorpio a kind of one-size-fits-all. I think we can expect it will have a UHD Blu-ray drive in it. So when you do upgrade to your 4K screen, all of the media will be available for it, your Blu-rays, your streaming media, whatnot. So that's kind of where it is there.
So what about the real next generation of consoles? Like, is there such a thing anymore? Will we just get these incremental steps, or will we get something that...
Yeah, well, I think, I kind of think the incremental step thing is short of defying the laws of physics. There's not much they can do about that. Unless there is a big leap in how much power we can fit on a certain slice of silicon. But when I met Mark Cerny last year, he was very specific that PS4 and PS4 Pro are of a generation, and he laid down a number of criteria for what he considers should be the next generation. A generational leap in CPU, faster GPU, of course. But even stuff like memory and storage, he was quite big on storage. I kind of agree. When in a world where it can take 2 minutes to load a Battlefield 1 campaign level. Yeah. But
I feel like with Microsoft, though, like it's part of their business plan at this point, where with the Xbox 360 compatibility and the Xbox One stuff going forward, it feels like they want to continue to keep this is like the Microsoft platform going forward. So it feels like they're embracing this iterative technology.
With cross-compatibility for their games on Windows as well.
Exactly.
They're moving past the box as being the sort of defining factor.
Yeah, there is something really compelling about it in that it is kind of a bit of a pain that you buy a new console and all of your existing titles, unless you keep the old console, you have to sort of consign it to the dustbin. And there have been some real events with back compat on Xbox One. For example, when Red Dead Redemption came out, that was a big thing, And I think it speaks to the fact that people kind of want to keep their games rather than have them effectively made obsolete.
And the fact that they're improved, that's even better, right?
Yeah, It's kind of just minor performance.
Sure,
in
but
some
it's
respects,
nice to
but
be
it
able
is
to
better.
revisit them and see
well,
them.
you know, this is the thing that I really want to see with Scorpio, which is, and we've seen it with boost mode, where your existing titles will run better on new hardware. It will never be to the same degree as you can with a PC, but it's still something that I would definitely love to see in a console box. So, but yeah, in terms of the next generation of console, well, I honestly think that Sony and Microsoft will stick with AMD. I think there will be that continuity in the catalog, in your games library, carrying it forward one generation to the next. I think it will be a kind of iterative console model. Maybe you've got your PS4 now, and I reckon that will be perfectly serviceable for the next 3 years easily, because the way it's been geared is that, this is the 1080p console, this is the 4K console. There is no exclusives that you can't run on either machine. Microsoft planning the same thing. So yeah, there will come a point where, one or both of those machines has to be kind of like, they have to draw the line. Next gen, I mean, I think it's pretty straightforward. The GPU will be bigger. There will be AMD's Ryzen technology will go in there. That's pretty much a given at that point. Some people have been doing some really interesting experiments with Ryzen at really low power, and they're getting pretty big performance there. So it's kind of like what you can expect to see with a console. So there is at least one generational leap in the CPU side, which is where we've kind of been let down.
Yeah, that's kind of been the weak point of this generation, really, and it continues to be a mild problem.
Yeah.
I'd say.
So yeah.
We'll take some questions from the floor in a second, but just before we do that, we've got this far talking about the future of gaming tech, and we haven't mentioned VR, which a couple of years ago would have been the only thing we were talking about.
Right. Yeah. Of course.
What's going on?
I think it's absolutely fascinating that Sony in particular jumped on it as early as they did. They obviously saw that something was there. But yeah, we were talking about this the other day. It's, I kind of view it as the Cyclops from X-Men model, where we're at 60s Cyclops at the moment, the original Cyclops, where he's got this enormous, great visor headgear on. And we kind of, I think for a mainstream mass market VR, we kind of need to be at 90s Cyclops, where it was like a nice pair of Ray-Bans. And that's kind of the issue that we got at the moment, where the headgear really is...
Yeah, I mean, that's the main thing for me. I really like VR, and I own several headsets, or have owned.
Yeah, you have more VR experience than all of us put together.
Yeah, but for me, the main problem is still, one, you need the space, you need the hardware to run it, and then actually wearing it on your head for long periods of time isn't actually that comfortable. So it's kind of a thing where I could jump in and play for maybe 20, 30 minutes, and then you feel like you have to get out. And it's the same where you're kind of isolated from everybody. So I'm feeling like that type of stuff is kind of hurting its chances, where you have to invest so much up front, and then you're kind of isolating yourself and wearing this somewhat uncomfortable thing. And I'm not so sure that appeals
we had
too much to a consumer these days.
We had a discussion, what is the killer app with VR? And initially, I thought it was VR itself, because the experience is so awesome. But I think we've discovered that we do need a killer game.
Well, I mean, I think the killer app for that is Super Hot VR.
Right.
That's I can't say enough good about that game.
I suppose the closest we've really got with the PSVR was Resident Evil 7.
Resident Evil 7 is actually I've heard a lot of good things about it. I've tried that as well, and I mean, that also shows some of the issues that they're still solving, is that the sense of scale is wrong.
Right.
Like, when you're in that world, everything looks tiny.
Right.
Which is something that seems to be tricky to get right, the scale of the world. Some games, I think Project Cars in VR, actually have a slider that lets you adjust in real time, like the scale. So you're sitting in the cockpit and you just try to visualize, all right, what would the steering wheel look like in front of me? And then it's like, okay, that looks perfect, let's go with that. So...
Yeah, I mean, we don't have the top-tier first-party developers working on VR games at the moment. That's kind of the thing, really, isn't it?
There's not the money there right now.
Yeah.
Because there's not the install base.
As ever, it's always about the games.
I think it's going to come down to a slow evolution of the technology over the years. I mean, Facebook are all in, so it's going to happen, I think.
Yeah.
I think that fundamentally the 90s Ray-Ban Cyclops is going to happen. probably sooner rather than later,
Okay.
5 years or so.
So
But,
the future of gaming tech is Cyclops in the 90s.
Yeah, 90s Cyclops.
What we all want.
That's the future.
We've got a mic in the centre aisle there, so if anybody's got a question, just step up to the mic and fire away.
No question.
Looks so ominous.
I like the spotlight.
There we go, one guy.
Hi there. Quick question. Wondering, why do you think that kind of generally now with the look at kind of the state of game development, a lot of industry and marketing puts a lot of emphasis on graphical fidelity as opposed to higher frame rates or more consistent frame times? Because, I mean, from watching your videos and people that understand it, if you know that it's more responsive to have like a better frame rate. So why don't you think, especially with PS4, why do you think games target like a kind of a janky 4K 30 frames as opposed to getting a solid like 1080p 60 frames?
Yeah, I think there's two answers to that. First of all, it's really much easier to market a prettier looking game at a lower frame rate than a slightly less prettier game at a higher frame rate. What I will say about that, though, is that if you look at all of the top-selling games, the franchises, your FIFAs, Call of Duties, Gran Turismos, Forzas, funnily enough,
They're all 60 frames per second.
Yeah. So, there is that, but that is the one first reason. The second reason is balance of the consoles this generation, where we have, I mean, you can actually see it when you look at the sort of the plan of the chip. You've got this enormous, great GPU here, and then these tiny little CPU cores alongside them. So, this is where the priority has been for the console designers, and that's really how the generation has played out. And with the Pro, and I'm going to assume the Scorpio, you've got the same size CPU clusters, and then you've got an even bigger GPU. So they're kind of pushed towards better visuals at 30 frames per second than 60.
Exactly.
Do you think they'll like reach a point of kind of diminishing returns where they'll push the hardware in its current state like furthest as they can graphics-wise, that they'll kind of default back to performance? That's the only other thing they can improve on?
I don't think so, because
There's always room to
fundamentally
go up.
you've still got that CPU limitation.
Oh yeah, I mean the CPU limitation is.
But we were actually discussing this. Compared to last gen, there have been more 60 frames per second games.
If you look back at like PS3 and 360, there's very few 60 frames per second titles. It's quite rare.
And if you look this generation, the likes of Battlefield and Halo have migrated across.
And plenty of smaller games as well. I mean, 60 frames per second is more common. So, I mean, we are seeing improvements in that area. And even the titles at 30 frames per second tend to be more stable than what we saw last generation. So I think there's been an improvement, but getting all the way to 60 frames per second again with the CPU limitations, kind of, I think it's easier to target those higher resolutions than it is to actually go for the high frame rate.
I mean, if there has been a trend more towards it this generation, maybe with more CPU power next generation,
They could get there.
We could be.
Yeah.
Thanks very much.
Thanks for that.
Hi there. Just wondering, what do you think is the future of retro gaming? Because I feel like more people and myself have to rely now on emulators and such due to failing hardware in original consoles and so on.
It's one for you, John, I think.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I do think emulation is quite important. I do also prefer to use original consoles, but like you say, they are aging and there's fewer of them in circulation, and eventually they're going to die. So we really do need to rely on emulator authors to really get there for us. And I think most people are not looking for necessarily like the 100% I'm on a CRT experience, though if you are, I mean, some of the CRT shaders that people are writing these days look pretty great. But, I mean, I think it's just emulation is going to be the future of preservation and continuing to be able to play those classic games on modern hardware. So
But we hear that a lot, John, but are there actually any consoles that are really difficult to find because they're all dead?
that's a good point.
I mean, well, I think the issue is that the further you go back in time, the kind of more robust the consoles were.
well, the Jaguar CD, if you want to play that. I mean,
okay, fair enough.
But I don't think anybody really wants to.
But, you know,
This
the
is what makes-
2600 is like bulletproof, isn't it, really?
Yeah, I mean, that is true a lot. And, you know, I actually, I think of solutions like what Analog was doing in other companies and modders, basically the FPGA stuff, where they're, I mean, getting to the more complex chips of more modern consoles, that's a tall order. But right now we're seeing a lot of progress made with essentially emulating using hardware, you could say. So you're still getting that form factor. You can still use your original cartridges, but it's completely brand new hardware. And I think that, so software and hardware emulation together are kind of, it's kind of the way forward there.
Okay.
And that's also what makes stuff like Microsoft's Xbox 360 back compatibility program. Because, I mean, it's just the last gen now, but it will be a retro generation before too long.
Exactly.
And it's good to see them actually keeping those,
Yeah.
hopefully, forwards compatible for a long time.
It's an issue with systems like the original Xbox, though, which really hasn't been emulated, and
Yeah.
Microsoft itself doesn't support it, so we'll see.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi. Do you know of any specific sort of debugging tools or methods that people have used throughout development to sort of manage frame pacing? Because I know that's a sticking point, particularly in a lot of games, is the frame pacing. And especially at the moment on PS4 with Unity, there's issues with like frame rate and frame pacing as well. But I've not seen any sort of development tools that show anything off in similar way to the way you guys do in the videos and stuff.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. I mean, Microsoft have got a tool called PIX, Performance Inspector for Xbox, I think it's called. Although, weirdly, it works on PC as well. And Sony have Razer. Now, I think fundamentally, though, this is an eye thing more than a...
Yeah.
We first saw it on this generation with Need for Speed Rivals.
Yeah,
you
exactly.
pointed that
That's
one out,
it,
Tom.
yeah.
And literally the solution was a line of code in there that was present brackets 1. They changed it to present brackets 2, and that fixed it. That was kind of that one. But I think it is, I'm not really sure how they can actually debug it, short of having maybe a real-time version of the tool that we have, or just, having the human faps like John here.
Somebody that
who
sees
can
it,
ju-
exactly.
who sees it. But yeah, I mean, it is really weird because we were looking at Tomb Raider on the Shield Android TV. That's the most blatant example recently.
Yes.
Yeah, we were going to include it in a Switch video. I think we did do it. And I said, can you get some capture for
You
it?
were
Tom?
swearing
'Cause
blind, it was dropping below 30.
It looked horrible.
Yeah.
It just didn't look proper. It looked like it was running like low 20s.
Yeah,
And,
I found you a clip, and they said go for a more demanding area. I thought, okay, I'll find that.
And it was a
still-
lot, 30 frames per second, but it wasn't at all consistent, and it just looked wrong.
And then thinking of Tomb Raider, that's actually an interesting point, since it's usually tied to how they refresh the screen. So Rise of the Tomb Raider on PS4, when it first launched, it had the input latency problem. So they fixed it, it improved, but then they further refined it by, again, modifying the way they update the screen, which then actually introduced bad frame pacing. And, of course, we pointed that out, and they went back and basically reverted to their previous fix. And so you can see it's a kind of a delicate
I think
change
one
there.
thing to point out, though, is that it is kind of a minority of titles.
Yeah, it's not that.
And if you go back like to the original Ridge Racer on PS1, that's a perfectly frame-paced 30 frames per second. So,
They drew differently with the frame buffers and stuff. It was kind of a different approach, I suppose, to rendering.
yeah, but fundamentally they knew how it had to look to
Yeah,
be smooth.
exactly.
So it is a case of keeping an eye on it, really. But, we were looking at Halo 3, that had issues.
Yeah, there are older games with this problem as well. Like I noticed Halo 3 having this issue back in the day.
But we didn't have the tools to kind of figure
and
out what was going on.
I didn't even know how to describe it at the time. I was telling, Frank O'Connor over there, like kind of discussing it, and people weren't really like sure exactly what I was talking about, what I was seeing. Like, no, it's 30 frames per second. It's like, no, there's something wrong.
I think the bottom line, though, is that we've kind of drawn a lot of attention to it, and in a lot of cases, like Mafia 3, for example, when we've pointed it out, it's been fixed within days.
Yeah.
So that's quite heartening.
Cool, thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Hello. I was thinking with the next generation, could we see the death of like physical media and say with like put more like online gaming, like cloud and like more storage for these consoles?
I think there's a gradual shift to digital. I think as long as games cost as much as they do, people will want to buy physical, and they will want to be able to buy and sell it. I mean, there's a reason why very few people buy and sell their movie Blu-rays or music CDs, and that's fundamentally because they're a lot cheaper, I think. But when a game is 40, 50, 55, 60 pounds, that's a lot more of a difficult call. But, I think we will be transitioning slowly but surely to digital.
Because Xbox was originally going to do that with when they first introduced the Xbox One, and this was supposed to be like a verification, but then it all got backfired.
Yeah, that's true. And I think kind of Microsoft maybe had plans for the portability of your catalog. They, if I was Microsoft at that point, I would have wanted to make the console version of Steam, which is what I think they might have been doing.
I think that's what they're still trying to do.
Yeah,
I
think like to do. They're trying to converge PC and console in a way.
You can see it with the backward compatibility. Like, it doesn't read on the disk; it reads on the hard drive. So
That's right.
yeah.
It's all going in that direction.
What about, I mean, this is another thing that was the future of gaming technology 3 or 4 years ago, streaming gameplay. So when OnLive was a thing and Gaikai, which then became PlayStation Now, it's not a service we talk about often. What happened there?
I think it's kind of what's similar to happens with VR, where the initial experience simply wasn't good enough.
Yeah.
And it's actually a real shame because GeForce Now, the grid system they've got, it's phenomenally good for for that kind of format, but people aren't interested anymore because
I think the internet situation is still a problem, and
there is that as well.
There is the quality degradation. I mean, even with the GeForce Grid stuff, it's still clear that you're playing a video, and there's going to be inherent latency in that. And the experience is just never going to be quite as good as playing on a real machine.
But Netflix. Well, I was going to say Netflix is never going to be as good as.
Those are still films, right? I mean, they're shot with cameras, and there's like inherent flaws in the image, right? That you don't get with a digital video game, where it's like perfect pixels.
Yeah.
So I think it's going to be harder to solve.
I think as a supplementary service to
supplementary maybe.
If you're a PC gamer, and if it was keenly priced, the ability to access all of your games in the cloud from anywhere might have some value. NVIDIA have got the thing now where they're going to be offering hours, they're selling it by the hour almost, access to their system, and you can sync all of your Steam games, your saves. So that could have some value, but I think people are kind of wedded to their local systems at the moment.
Yeah.
Thanks very much.
Thanks.
Hi there. You spoke about 4K gaming and the visuals of games, and we can just assume that it's just going to go up and up and up in the future. Do you see there ever being a limit that the human eye can't tell any difference anymore? And therefore, what will be the next thing for these companies to do?
It's an interesting one. I think visual complexity will just get better. I'm going to be really interested to see if they can actually push anything beyond 4K on the user. I mean, they're already talking about 8K specs. But I kind of think there will be a law of diminishing returns kicking pretty heavily there.
You need a very large screen.
I mean, there is a big argument at the moment. Hey, I've got a 1080p screen. It's fine. Do I really need 4K? And, on a lot of games, probably not. But you look at Horizon. And if I was watching Netflix Iron Fist just come out. I was watching that on my laptop, 1080p, and then I was watching it on the LG OLED at 4K HDR. And, even with the 1080p image right here, I would still much prefer the HDR image over there. I mean, it was just a class beyond, both in terms of the HDR and indeed the resolution. I think you can definitely see the difference.
But I think we're starting to reach the diminishing returns point on that, because I think 4K TVs are the first time where I really felt like my eyes could no longer distinguish pixels from like a normal viewing distance. Whereas, with 1080p and everything, you could still see the pixel grid from a normal distance. So I feel like we're getting to this point there where I guess you almost want to say like what we've seen with phones and whatnot, where from your normal usage distance, it's no longer about the individual pixel.
It's still an issue with games having a high resolution. In films, you can get away with a high resolution, and you won't notice it because of the way the films are treated through the production. But games you can still see at 4K without anti-aliasing, the stair steps. You can just about pick it out. So there may be a case for super sampling, but really, with a decent post-AA solution, you're gonna be sorted, I think.
Let's say 4K is it, and we're stuck at 4K forever. What would the games companies choose to focus on next instead of pushing the resolution?
There'll be just the same as always: better fidelity imagery, better visuals, more realistic. What I will say, though, is I think 4K is here for now. I think there's a lot of work in them getting HDR sorted, kind of standardized way. I mean, it really is quite shocking, the difference at the moment. It really is. And, I think there's actually willful consumer misinformation going on there where, your £400 4K screen with HDR support, I mean, it can accept an HDR signal, but it can't effectively render it. And in some cases, it's worse than watching it in HDR. Yeah. So there's a lot of work for them to be done there, I think, before they should start thinking about 8K and stuff like this.
Yep.
I did note, though, there is an 8K Dell monitor coming out. It's like $5,000 or something.
Grab yourself a bargain.
I've got I kind of want to see it.
I mean, if you do SLI...
So I don't need it, but...
I'm never going to buy it, but I want to see it.
We're just waiting for the 1080 Ti SLI 8K tests.
Yeah, that would be fun.
Let's do it.
All right, that's all we've got time for. Thanks for your question.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone, for coming. Thanks to Rich, John, and Tom.
Thanks a lot.
Lovely.
All right.